This is Wookies in the Woods, my absolute favorite event of the year. In the last handful of years, I've prepped a bunch of different cars for this event, starting with my car after driving it home from Miami, then my buddy Sean after a full respray, the R32 I picked up for Autry from BMP Tuning, and this year we're going to do a bunch of work to this Mark IV R32, deep blue pearl on cloth, and big thanks to WD-40 brand for partnering on this video. More about what we're going to use from them in a little bit. Now, in an interesting twist, look what rolled in right as I was wrapping up the blue car. This Mark IV R32 with the destroyed bumper. But let's focus on that blue one first. Now, the client sent a pretty long list of things to get done on this car. But before I get started, I'm going to shake the car down and see what else we can find. Overall, this Mark IV R32 is in incredible condition, minus some worn out bushings, a floppity shifter, collapsing engine mounts, and a bit of surface rust on some of the mechanical parts. This is a wonderful example of an OEM plus R32. But that was a lot of talking, and we have a lot of work to do.
So I think we're going to start on the interior, dealing with this floppity shifter. I'm also going to be putting a new glove box door on as well. Some of the floppiness in the shifter is actually under the hood. The client didn't want to do any short shifter yet anyway. We're going to try and get most of this handled with just a bushing kit. What's cool is, to do all these bushings, I got to pull the center console. And I also have to pull the center console to do the glove box, so there's quite a bit of overlap. I'm also probably not going to use any power tools here because even though a lot of this interior has been replaced at some point in time, like recent, I don't trust Mark IV plastic at all. The last thing I want to do is go zinging with an electric power tool, bust up some of this plastic. When we look at the play in this shifter, there's a couple of things going on. One, where this ball cup is right here. Look at the play there. You can see the whole cup moving around. The other one is over here, where there's this little rubber bushing. We're gonna fix both of those and more here shortly. All right, there we go, nice and easy. Yay! We can get that guy out of the way. This piece is new. So I did say I wasn't gonna use power tools, but I am gonna use them right here. This just slides to the side. This little wobbly guy a lot of times is completely gone. So the fact that this one's even there is pretty good, actually. Next, we'll take the cover for the ball off. This is a place you need to be super careful because these bolts like to break. These bushings here that I'm working with now are the bushings for the up and down to like go into reverse. If you're watching this going, man, Charles, slow down, go step by step. I actually have done a video step-by-stepping this exact shifter with these exact bushings, Diesel Geek bushing kit. So I'll try and link up that video. Y'all know sometimes I don't remember to do that. Might have to wiggle this a bit. So we're gonna get the shifter up. We'll take the ball cup off. It does help if you undo the cables on the transmission. Gives you a little bit more wiggle room. Oops. My whole light fell down in there. Go ahead and get this crank arm out of the way here now. I think I got it. I did got it. So here is our open shifter box. We actually have to put bushings on the cables inside of there. I have found a series of picks is the best way to do it. You also want to be real careful not to put too much tension on the cable. You don't want to break the cable. So you can kind of see the cable that I'm working with right there. There we go. So there's one. And then we got the little one, that's the front to back cable, I believe. You gotta be extra careful with that one because the end is plastic. You for sure don't want to bust it off. Oh, I got it. I got it. I dropped it, but I got it. Also, the folks at Diesel Geek have a pretty good write-up on this. Did I get it? Oh, I got it. I got it. Good job, me. We'll lube everybody up before we assemble. The other cable and bushing has a snap ring on it for the new one. I think this, if I remember right, was like the worst part of this whole job. Okay, with that all in, let's put our shifter back. We gotta, this is how it is in the car, by the way. It's pretty, oh geez, not like that. This is how it sits in the car, by the way. Shift, 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 push down for reverse. The beauty of a lot of this is really only goes one way. Oh, f***ing cool. Oh no.
Well, as you can see, the camera fell over and did this to this client's radio, which is great because this radio is no longer available. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the radio out and get with the client to figure out what the heck we're going to do. There's some pretty decent options, but what I can tell you, this is going to cost me big time to make sure I make it right.
Next, we're going to do the part that Diesel Geek calls the first gear getter, which is get rid of this thing right here. I just usually take a razor knife, cut it. Most of the time, by the time you get to replacing this piece is completely gone anyway. This one's still pretty good though. Probably should have just done this while I had the whole dang thing off. This is the hardest I've ever had to work to get one of these off. So you're probably thinking, why didn't you just leave it alone? Because we're already here, my friends. For real, I've never had one be on this much. Wildly inappropriate, giving me that much trouble. All right, there we go. This is usually like the main bushing that fails. This guy just slides right into place. I super glue these in, and the reason is I had an issue on my Mark IV R32 where the bushing kept popping out, and so I like to glue mine in. You could use a little RTV in it too, that's fine. Just enough to kind of hold it in place. It doesn't have to be perfect, and you definitely want to make sure you don't get any of that super glue on the inside part, right? And also immediately after installing that, I realized I forgot to put this cup in. So also, I am going to have to fully adjust this shifter, but we need to get our shifter end links on, and there was a part that I actually forgot to order, the super slider. Normally when doing these, I do them with a short shifter kit, like a Holy Shift kit from Pauly D, but this client wasn't sure they wanted to go the short shifter route. So this one, then the spring, then this guy, then that, just like that. Oh yeah. Now we can go ahead and do our shift cables. These can be kind of a pain in the butt. Basically what you do is you squeeze the spring and then you have to twist it. It locks into place, kind of like you see here. Take the little clip off, then just slide it on off. So it'll lock into place like this. Take the old one out, get the new one locked back like that, just like the old one. Slip it on the cable, put it on the shift selector, put your clip back in, and then I'm gonna leave it like this until we lock the transmission and the shifter assembly. And we'll do that adjustment at some point. I don't know when. Whenever I feel like it is probably when. The other cable, same way. They are different shifter end links though, so you wanna make sure you get them on the right one. This part is a different size. I forgot, we got one more part to put on this. We got the super slider to put on. So we're not very far in here, so this should be pretty straightforward. We'll take our clip off, get this guy back out of the way, and the part we're actually replacing is this right here. You'll see in just a second how sad that thing gets. Oh, so close. Go here, there we go. So here is the piece we're gonna replace. This is super simple to do, just pop that guy off. There's the little ball. Then we're gonna install this one. I'm gonna clean it off and then we'll put some grease on it. I'm also going to clean off the selector down here and get some fresh clean grease in it and then reinstall it. So we have rehabbed our entire shifter assembly. So this will be like OEM plus type feel, which is what the client wanted. If you want even firmer, install a short shifter and replace the bushings in that bracket. Those rubber guys will wear out and be soft over time. This is what those upgraded bushings would look like.
With the center console out, it's only a handful more screws to get the glove box assembly out. The client provided a new glove box door. Not only is the latch failing, but the soft touch gets kind of gross. In order to replace the door, we have to pull the whole assembly out. This is a super common Mark IV problem, and whatever you do, don't turn It's a super common Mark IV problem into any kind of drinking game. You definitely will not survive till the end of the video. Initially, the plan was just to replace the glove box door, which is pretty easy and straightforward. However, now we are suffering from the while you're in there itis, and we're going to be replacing the entire glove box assembly. Because I'm going to have to hunt down and order those parts, I'm just going to set all this glove box stuff aside. While we wait on our glove box parts, let's keep going and replace our clamshell. This is the trim around the steering column, and like so much Mark IV stuff, it was covered in a soft touch material when it was new, but over time that gets really sticky and really gross. The trim is held on with 4 Phillips head screws, and we will need to take the steering wheel off to get to the front facing ones. First releasing the spring clips on the airbag, then taking the one bolt out that holds the steering wheel on. Here you can see the alignment marks for the steering wheel and the steering column. Make sure you pay attention to this because you want to get the steering wheel wheel back on straight. Then we can take both the lower and upper covers off, leaving what is likely pleather on, which we'll swap onto our new one. While you have this lower cover off, it's a really good idea to check your ignition switch and make sure the wires aren't melted or anything like that. It's a super common Mark IV problem and mega easy to do when you already have the cover off. After that, we'll go ahead and put the new lower one on and the new upper one on, mount it up and make sure that it's properly aligned, then put our steering wheel in, then bolt our steering wheel up, put the airbag on. You'll notice too that I did not disconnect the battery to do this job. I've almost never done that, as there should be no airbag deployment with the key off. However, if it makes you feel a little uneasy, go ahead and disconnect the battery. It won't hurt anything in any way to have it disconnected. Next up, we're going to replace the A pillar trims because the fabric is all saggy and coming off. This is a super common Mark IV problem. In fact, pretty much everything we're doing are super common Mark IV problems. You technically do need a special tool, which is T10078, and that's going to allow you to slide the clip holder that lives kind of behind where the airbag logo is on the pillar. You can do it without that. It's just a little bit tricky. For the record, I absolutely hate the way these are installed, but it's done in the name of safety for when the curtain airbag deploys, this trim piece doesn't come flying off and slap you in the face. So you're going to take the tool just above where the airbag symbol is and then slide it in. You'll feel and hear when it engages the slide piece, and then you'll pull the tool kind of away towards the headliner. Then unclip the A pillar and remove it. This does, however, leave behind the actual clip that clips into the body of the car. It's not a bad idea to replace both of these parts, but you can get them out and kind of massage them back into place. We'll transfer the clip and the slider piece from our old A pillar to the new one. It should look about like this, and then all we really have to do is snap it back into place. The worst part about what I'm doing here, and really a lot of things on Mark IV, is these parts aren't available anymore. So you either have to get them recover them yourself, or find used ones that are in better condition, which is what I'm doing here.
Moving right along, one of the other things we need to do is replace both horns, which live on the driver's side behind this cover here. I also have to pull the belly pan off anyway to do the oil change, so we'll overlap a little. So many screws. There we go. Oh, and look, a free connector. Dingle dingle, this is for the ambient air temp sensor. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug that guy back in. So both horns live right up here. One horn is called the fanfare horn, and the other one is called the trumpet horn. This car has a low tone and a high tone horn. That's why there's two. Well, I ran into a slight problem. So this is the horn that I just took off. Notice the square connector. This is the customer supplied horn. We got a square connector and a rounded off plug on the horn. So I'm gonna have to do some digging and see what we're gonna do about that one. In the meantime, I'm just gonna unbolt this other one and we'll check that and see if it's right. Like, the horn looks very different, but at least the connectors are the same. All right, it plugs in, so it'll hopefully be fine.
A little bit of a delay with one of the horns is not going to stop our progress. Since I'm here, I'm gonna go ahead and take this intake off because we're gonna be removing this water sucking air intake and replacing it with the 42 draft design intake. I'm not going to be installing the new intake just yet because that'll actually get in the way of some other jobs we have to do. So for now, I'm just gonna get rid of this one and we'll install the new intake later on.
All right, time now to start on the undercar, and this car has wheel locks on it. I don't always trust these wheel lock keys to not explode on an impact, so I'm just gonna pop the wheel locks loose, then we'll get the car up, we'll take the wheel off. Also, huge ups to the client for leaving the wheel lock somewhere I could find it. If you take your car in to get serviced and have wheel locks, make sure you leave it out for them so that they can find it super easy and not have to dig through all your personal stuff to find the wheel lock.
Now, during the initial inspection, I found that the control arm bushings were pretty well collapsed. Another super common Mark IV problem. Now for this one, I got replacement control arms with new bushings from our man Pauly D. This is also where our WD-40 brand stuff is going to start coming into play. Now, because this car is a little bit crusty, I did a pre-treat on all the fasteners that I knew I was going to have to take off using WD-40 Specialist Penetrant Easy Reach. And that flexible straw is awesome because it allows you to get in places you might not otherwise get to with just one of those little red ones that likes to doink off and go flying. In addition to the front control arms, I'm also going to be upgrading the rear sway bar. This is one of my absolute favorite mods for this car. Not only are we going to get a bit better performance, but this factory one looks pretty sad.
Control arm on the driver's side is pretty straightforward on the manual cars. I said that, and I shouldn't have. Ah, cool, it broke. Well, awesome. I guess there's no point in even worrying about it. The bad part is that stud is part of the ball joint. Might as well just break them all off. Dang it. This is one of those cars that's not as rusty as some, but it's enough. And at this point, what's the difference? No point in heating this up. Of course, that one came right off. Delightful. Okay, well, I guess we're in it for a ball joint now too. Now, this one, on the other hand, we gotta be real careful with, because this bolt here is actually, the nut is captive in the subframe. In fact, I think we're gonna get some heat on that bad boy before we go too much further. All right, let's see if, at least get her loose. Ooh, yeah, come on, baby. Nice and easy. And hopefully that's not the nut turning too. I think that's just the bolt. Oh yeah, it's coming out. It's coming out, my friends. See if we can just nurse this thing out. Hey! Actually, that bolt looks pretty good. Let's hope the back one comes off problem-free. There we go. That one wasn't bad at all. Now we can pry down. This one should come out pretty easy. Yay! All right, let's see if we can get this ball joint done before we get our new control arm back in. And for this one, I got some map gas, which should be a little bit more better. What I'm trying to do is not have to take the axle out and zing it with an impact gun. Let's see. Hey! Did the whole thing turn or just the nut? That's the question. Oh yeah, I think we're gonna be good. Let's get a little looby-loob on this old girl. That's fantastic. Now sometimes you can whack this knuckle with a hammer and the ball joint will drop right out. No dice. Which means we get our ball joint tool, which is okay, because this is actually one of my favorite tools to use. This will make short work of this ball joint, but it usually explodes off, so that's something you gotta be careful of. See? Just like that. One sad ball joint down. Let's go ahead and get our new ball joint in. Thankfully, since I'm rebuilding my own R32, that'll be finished sometime, Lord knows when, I had another ball joint. Okay, new ball joint, new nut. We got a couple new nuts for the bottom. Let's get our control arm back in. These are super easy to install. Let's go ahead and get our new one in. I usually get them set like that. A couple of wackadoos with a mallet. And then we're just gonna start the bolts. We gotta wait till we get the vehicle on the ground before torquing it down. So we'll have to keep that in mind. These are a slight adjustment for front camber. Now, since we're redoing the dog bone bushing, I'm gonna take the dog bone out. Also, you kinda need to take this out to get the engine pushed up high enough to do the engine mounts and the passenger side control arm bushing, which I'll show you in a second. Uh-oh, I don't like that at all. This, you better stop being stupid. Uh-oh. Ah, come on! Man, thought it was coming out, and it said, nope, I'm not doing it.
So on this one, the bolt is actually seized inside the dog bone. So with a little hammering, a little bit of heat, a little more hammering, and a little bit more heat.
Oh, there we go, there we go. Whoa, look at this.
Now, in order to extract it, I'm gonna throw some more heat on it, clean it off with the wire brush, and then we're gonna use the two nut method, similar to how we would install a new stud, which is run two nuts on, tighten them together, and then use the back one to take the stud off, or in this case, our broken bolt.
Ooh, ooh, heck yeah. We're kind of turning. Spray some spray. Well, it came out. That's what's important. Since I'm right here, I'm gonna go ahead and run a thread chaser in here. Just clean that up real quick. Now, I don't have new hardware for this, so we're gonna have to get a couple new bolts. Okay, we're moving to the back while we wait for our engine mounts and for something else. Oh, the bolts for the dog bone that exploded. I'm gonna take this exhaust off. We're gonna take the heat shield above it off, and we are going to replace the rear swaybar with an H&R swaybar. Up against there. There we go. There we go. This isn't too bad. It's just this section. The only parts I'm actually worried about are these. This one's just completely rusted through already, so I'm not too worried about that one. I say they normally crumble apart, and this one's like the strongest one ever made. Chucky, chickadee chew. Let's see. Oh, that's a 10. Uh-oh, I'm out of 10 mils. Oh, almost hit me in the face. Rear Swaybar. It's little, look at how little it is. Let's see if we can break these brackets loose for this sway bar without much sadness. Come on, oh yeah, that felt nice. Okay, yes, that's great. Uh-oh, so that one got sad. Let's hit this one with a little rust penetrant and let it sit for a few minutes. I don't want to have to extract a broken bolt up here. I really don't. All right, I think it'll be okay. Doesn't feel great, but I think it'll be all right. We got it. Good job, everybody. You guys at home should give yourself a round of applause for sticking around in the video this long. So there's this one big bolt that holds the shock absorber and the sway bar to, I think they call this whole piece the trailing arm. We're gonna take that off next. Yes. I did this on the other side too, but before I take this big old bolt out, I'm just supporting the trailing arm here. Otherwise, that's all gonna come crashing down. Our spring's gonna fall out. Run our bolt out. If you need to get the jack out, just take the bolt and thread it back in a little bit, and that'll hold it up just fine. So here's our factory sway bar. This is the H&R bar. It's thick. It's so much thicker. In fact, let's measure that real quick. The factory bar, 15.4 millimeters, 21.18 millimeters. Well, 21.11 millimeters. It's close enough. So it's big. We'll go ahead and get our new end link and bolt in. This is probably the most annoying part of this whole thing, to get these all installed together. Okay, went ahead and thread chased all the bolt holes and the hardware that I'm not replacing. Let's get this guy as up here as we can. Okay, now we can put our brackets in. Then I'm not gonna torque any of the suspension until I'm ready to torque all of the suspension. Next up, we're gonna do spark plugs. Before we start messing around with our coil connectors, because this is the most broken connector on Volkswagens, period, I'm gonna hit each connector with a little bit of WD-40 Specialist silicone spray, and I'm gonna go right where the lock tab of the connector is. This is all an attempt to not break any more. Then I'm gonna take a curved pick and I'm gonna go up under the connector and with the pick try and release the lock for the connector. If you're thinking to yourself, I don't know if I can get that up underneath there without breaking the connector, you're probably right. Be careful here. It should pop right up. If it doesn't, you probably don't have the tab for the connector actually pressed in. There's a special tool, shocking, I know. For the coil packs, I just generally use a pair of pliers. Definitely not a bad thing we're putting some spark plugs in this car. We're going back together with the proper NGKs, but just for comparison, you can see quite a bit different of a plug. I always start my spark plugs by hand, and we'll go right about 30 Newton meters. I'm not gonna make you watch all this, but you'll get to hear all the beeps from all of them. Ready? That's all. I'm gonna leave the engine cover off for a little while still until we get everything else done. Went ahead and did the pollen filter, and this one is actually super clean. You can see there's a little bit of yuck in it, but so much better than the majority of the pollen filters I've replaced over the years. Nice job, owner. Also, I did record it, but this new camera is a different record button, and so I didn't actually hit record, I just hit the focus button. So, fun fact. Now that our engine mounts have arrived, we can go ahead and work on our passenger side lower control arm, the engine mount. It all kind of overlaps because we can't get a bolt out without lifting up our engine. Before getting too crazy, it's time for some more penetrant. I'm also gonna replace the ball joint. I'm just gonna go ahead and do it because we did the other side, it makes sense, but I'm gonna try and crack this one loose. Ow! That hurt. Figured this way, we'll have two new ball joints, two new lower control arms. Undo our ball joint. Go ahead and get this back bolt out next. This is a pretty reasonably safe one to just go ahead and send it on out. Sometimes this one gets water in it for some reason, so when you spin it out, you might get splooshed with juiciness, so just be careful on that side. Now on the VRs, there's a bolt kind of tucked back here behind the oil pan. You can get to it, you can loosen it, but you can't get it all the way out because the oil pan's in the way. 3 ways to get it out. 1, the stupidest way, unless you're doing an oil pan anyways, to take the oil pan off. I hate that way. The second way is to unbolt the engine mount up top, lift the engine up a little bit. That'll let the bolt clear. I like that way okay. The way I normally do it is I drop the subframe and that gives you enough room. Since we're doing engine mounts anyway, it's gonna overlap. We'll just lift it up. So it's gonna be kind of an awkward way to approach this. See if we can loosen this without having to get any heat. We'll get some heat on it if we need to. Nope, don't like how that felt at all. Sort of felt like the bolt was stretching more than anything. Let's put some heat on this old girl. I don't like doing this, just so you know. Oh, it's moving. Okay, okay. Now we'll get a little penetrant in there. Lube that guy up. Really not into the idea of having to drill out a bolt back there. Let's try it again. It's a little fire, it's okay. Don't worry about that. Okay, I think the bolt is now moving.
Okay, while I'm in the edit, I'm gonna give you guys a little bit better context of what I'm actually doing here. Where I'm shining the light, I can actually see the backside of the bolt through a small hole in the subframe. So as I turn the wrench really slow, I'm trying to make sure that the bolt is turning at basically the same rate that I'm turning the wrench. That way, if I start to turn the wrench and the bolt stops turning, I know I can stop and add a little more penetrant or some more heat. This subframe has a captive nut inside of it that the bolt threads into. And if something goes sideways, it can be really challenging to replace it. And I'm not trying to mess with any of that stuff. So a little bit of slow and steady here definitely was the answer.
I think we did it. Oh, man, y'all. I was stressed out. So I'm gonna lower the car down and then roll the floor jack under with a block of wood and just support the engine a little bit. Then we're gonna get all this stuff out of the way. By the way, if you take this and tuck it out of the way, remember that there's a vent in the lid, in the cap, and yeah, it can make a giant mess and spill all over the place. Now we gotta take our engine mount out. 2 16s and 2 18s. All right, we'll get this guy out of the way. Now that the mount is out of the way, we can finally get this bolt out and get this whole entire control arm out. I'll do the ball joint when we get it up in the air so I don't have to lay on the ground anymore doing it down here. As you can see, this old mount was completely collapsed. Real sad. This rubber was actually resting on the metal when it was installed in the car. We got our new mount. We'll get that kind of set in place. We're gonna have to lower our engine down pretty significantly in order to get it set proper. There are measurements to align these mounts properly, and then we can lower our engine down a bit. Remember, I did a full DIY on this if you're like, I want more step-by-step. Of course, new hardware, because I don't think there's a bolt on a Volkswagen anymore that isn't dang torque to yield. So that's everybody tightened down. I'm gonna wait to torque this until we do the transmission mount too, make sure the whole powertrain is aligned properly. It sure would have been easier if this control arm wasn't in the way, but I didn't feel like laying on the ground anymore. Get that guy out. Get that in, we'll get the nut started. Then I'm gonna go ahead and snug everybody down, because remember, we're not gonna tighten any of this till we get the car set on the ground. Next up, we're gonna do our trans mount, very similar to how the engine mount came out. I have to move some wires to the side. There's a duct that normally lives here. 2 18s, 2 16s, and a 13 buried way back here. That's not good. That's never a good sign when your bolt doesn't wanna come out. All right, sometimes these are not super happy. Let's see if we can carefully get this loose. Oh my goodness, this is not great. Oh, that feels real bad. Oh, I don't like that at all. I'm gonna spray some penetrant on there and just fill our hole up here. I'm gonna let that soak. Okay, so clearly that guy's acting dumb. I'm gonna loosen the mount, and then I might actually just take the mount down here off, the part that bolts to the transmission, and just kind of deal with it on the bench. I have a new bolt, so that's not a problem. Remember, I have the dog bone out, so that'll allow me to drop the trans down pretty far and hopefully give me the access I need. All right, oh, I think we're gonna be fine. There we go. All right, let's take this whole contraption over to the bench, see if we can get it out there. This is actually not terribly uncommon for this to happen. We got that in. Let's get some heat on this thing now in a way where we won't catch the car on fire. Ooh, there we go. Let's see if we can get some more heat on it. The bolt's coming out. It's either coming out with the threads or it's gonna be fine. Oh, I think the threads are coming with it for free. Oh yeah, they did. They did. Look at all that. Look at all, why is it full of dirt? So the first handful of threads actually came with it. So this hole goes down to about here, and the first centimeter or so of threads are missing. I do have another one of these for a front wheel drive car. I'm gonna just double check and see, maybe it's the same one. And just like I expected to have, I do have another mount. Unfortunately, I don't have new bolts that go into the transmission, but I think that'll be okay. We'll make do. These are actually still available as of right now, but they're almost $200, so we're just gonna use this one.
Now I got pretty lucky having another one of these mounts. The way the threads are damaged on this mount, they are repairable, and a time cert is probably the best way to go, followed up next by a helicoil. At some point, I'll end up making the repair to the original mount. Before installing this one, I'm going to run a thread chaser down both of these threaded holes in an effort to prevent any future sadness. Now I can install that mount back into the car. I've been calling it a mount. This piece is probably technically more a bracket than a mount. And then I'll install the new 034 mount, just like we did on the engine side. I did do a full DIY installing these engine mounts on my R32. These are the 034 street density ones, so they're a really good OEM-like replacement, not something you have to worry about being really harsh or creating a lot of vibration. So it's a great mount when you're looking to do something that's very similar to stock.
Next, we're gonna do our dog bone bushing. Looking back, probably should have just got a new dog bone from 034 to match the engine mount. This one's pretty crusty. You can see where it's all oxidized right here. I actually have another one from another car, unknown which one. So we're gonna use this one to replace the bushing. I've done a video on how to do both of these step by step. We're only gonna do the one in the back cup here. This might be easier to do in the vise, but we're gonna do it right here, starting by taking off this back bolt. Here we got some leftover bushing yuck there. We'll get all that cleaned out. We need to separate this piece out, so we're gonna just silicone spray the heck out of this. Lube it up a little bit. Just pry this apart. Just like that. We need to clean all the old bushing off of there. You don't want to leave any bits of bushing you see like that. We need to get that off of there. Now we need to get our bushings out of here. If I remember right, we can just pop these guys out. This is, look at how soft this is. Wow. I don't know what like stage that insert is that the client sent over, but it's definitely going to be stiffer than the one I took out. So here's our old pieces. Here's our new one. Just look at this, just collapsed alone, how much taller the new one is. And I could do that with this one, with the factory one. This one I can't, so that's good. We'll go ahead and install that. Put this in. We'll put our other one on. Then we need to drop the retainer nut in. I'm gonna drop a little bit of blue thread locker onto our bolt. Where's Paul when you need him to open your thread locker for you? Then we can just go ahead. Sometimes you really gotta squish this together because our bushing's so much thicker than the one we took out. It can be tricky to get the bolt started. Now we can get our freshly rebuilt dog bone installed. I'm gonna pull the engine forward a little, line up our bolts. And torquey, and torquey.
Now you might remember what seems like 150 years ago, we installed a whole bunch of new shifter stuff in the car, as well as shifter end links. The thing I didn't do was adjust them. And there's a very important reason why. If immediately after installing the shifter parts, we would have adjusted the linkage, odds are we would not have adjusted it properly. Keep in mind that worn engine mounts or a missing dog bone can impact the adjustment of the shifter. This is why when we're doing a bunch of jobs all at once, we got to make sure we pay attention to when we're doing what. Now for adjusting this shifter, it's super simple. I'm going to lock the shifter inside the car with the pin. Then there's another lock on the transmission. With both of those locked, all you have to do is unspring both shifter end links. And after that, they should be properly adjusted. If you want to see a much more in-depth version of this, I did a video on installing a short shifter which walks through this exact process. The final and most important part of this whole shifter adjustment, make sure you take the pin out and make sure you unlock the transmission. Otherwise, you're going to end up with broken parts. And we put a whole bunch of new stuff on, so we don't want broken stuff to go along with it.
Next, we're going to do one of my favorite mods on Mark IV's B5s, and that's the convenience flasher, where you tap the stalk and the blinker flashes 3 times. This is going to be extra easy because we have the radio out, hazard relay out. So this does require a tiny bit of disassembly, but not too bad. We do have to depin a couple of the hazard switch wires. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to pull a handful of wires out of this connector, install them into this connector, and this whole unit with the relay on it kind of piggybacks into our hazard switch. I also took a picture of this before doing this, which I recommend you do as well. If you're thinking, man, Charles, I wish you were going step by step. I probably said this already, so we'll see how many times it makes it in the video. I've pretty much done DIYs on all this stuff, like the in-depth step-by-step kind of DIY. Now, we have all these that we need to put back into this connector. Luckily, there's some pretty good instructions on this. Usually the hardest part of this whole thing is getting the connector out of here and then getting it back in. We can get our relays back in. Our hazards do work, so that's good. Get those guys all pushed back in. Next up, we're gonna fix my oopsie daisy and replace the radio. This is the same radio I have in my R32. I actually sent this radio over to Matt at Clusters by Litkey. What I had him do is actually swap out the LEDs so it had a little more of a factory look to it. So this is essentially plug and play. And you can see instead of being white, now it's blue, indigo blue, to match the Mark IV.
I felt absolutely terrible for doinking up this client's radio. So in addition to buying the new radio and having the LEDs swapped out, I wanted to make sure I did something a little extra for the client. So I removed the instrument cluster and sent it over to our man Matt from Clusters by Litkey. He swapped out the center MFI screen for a new one, added the gauge sweep on key cycle, and also polished up that front cover. Also, I didn't tell the client about that, so I'm pretty excited to see their reaction. The client wasn't mad about the radio at all, but I wanted to do something a little bit extra. Next up, we're going to be replacing the seal around the sunroof glass. While I've had tons of sunroofs out of VWs, I've never actually replaced just the seal on the glass. Now, this one wasn't leaking as far as I know, it's mostly cosmetic. Our first step in taking out the sunroof glass is venting the sunroof.
So 3 screws on each side for the sunroof, and then we'll just take the whole glass out, bring it over to the bench, and work on it there. The seal is one long piece that has a seam. You can see the seam right here. So my plan is undo it and then do the new one around. So I got this side undone. We'll start the new seal here and then just work it around. Hopefully that is a good way to do it. So something I just noticed, so this is the original seal. Look at this bit right here, which actually does the sealing. How collapsed it is compared to this one. I'm gonna just try and slide this in here. It looks like going from the bottom up. It's probably going to be the way.
Well, it turns out installing that seal wasn't all that bad. The keys that I found were plenty of soapy water and taking your time to make sure the seal was worked into the channel of the glass. I worked my way around the edge to make sure that the seam of the seal ended up exactly in the same place where they put it on from the factory. I did have to trim the seal a tiny bit and didn't end up using any adhesive. The other thing that's worth noting, I had a little bit of trouble initially closing the sunroof. So if you're going to do this, you might have to help the sunroof closed a little bit. And then I left it closed for like a week so that the new seal could kind of reform to the car. I don't think I've actually done any full DIYs on sunroof stuff, especially when it comes to adjusting them. Now, if you're interested in said sunroof DIY, let me know in the comments.
Let's go ahead and get this new freshie all installed. I also cleaned and lubricated the sunroof track. And so we're gonna set this guy into place and then go in the car and line it up. I wanted to wait to put the glove box in till our radio and all that was worked out, in case we needed to get behind the dash or something. So now it is time to install our freshie glove box. Oh, look at that. That looks super good. Okay, I'm gonna bolt this in. Now I can drop the center console back in, being very careful. All right, I'm gonna button this back up. We're gonna move on to the next thing. And what is going to probably be my favorite part, putting our shift knob back on. Clamp our clamp. Ooh, that old girl feels real nice. Next up, we're gonna put our intake on. I have to remove the airflow meter because it actually bolts to our new intake. So we'll get that off of there. And I'm gonna go ahead and put the boot back on since we're right here. Then we're gonna take this and install it in our intake. There's also an O-ring that needs to be installed. So a little looby lube never really hurt anybody. Go ahead and bolt it down. So there's really not much to installing this intake short of just setting it in place. It basically bolts up where the factory airbox bolted up. Okay, so I had to rework the intake a little bit. When I first put it on, I was having some fitment issues and it wasn't lining up at the boot. What ended up being is the adapter right here for the airflow meter was installed upside down before it got sent out. So I took it apart, flipped it around, and now the intake fits pretty well. I'm actually gonna use a couple of spacers right here just to lift it up a bit, but a little bit of mod and we're good to go. We are in the this kind of stuff is not all that exciting stage. Also, because the engine is cold, I'm gonna just take the drain plug out, let it drain, and we're gonna work on the exhaust at the back. Now, normally you should be able to run these drain plugs out by hand all the way, but this one is not happy. All right, so we're gonna raise this all the way up. Listen to that baby drain. Let's see if I can be semi-smart. Probably asking a lot here. And get this exhaust up. So my plan is to set it on the under hoist support stand, or as I call it, the stiff knee. Some people call it a pole jack, whatever you want to call it. It's cool with me. It's cool with you, it's cool with me. We're gonna just start this one bolt here, and we're gonna lift with our muscles. Good thing this is not very heavy. It's not like some other exhausts that weigh 1,000,000 pounds. All right. Now, that's not gonna be very stable, so we're gonna drop that in. All right, I'm gonna bolt this up. After that, we gotta get these tips off and replace just the tips. We're only replacing the tips. Also, fun fact, I'm dumb because I forgot to put the heat shield on. So we gotta take the exhaust back down so I can put the heat shield on. Cool job, Chuck. Cool job. What an idiot. This is what happens sometimes, my friends. All right, I'm gonna mess with this and get this in, then we'll get the exhaust on after that. That is much more better. Also, I wasn't wearing my safety glasses, so kind of a dumb thing when you're working back here on exhausts that are kind of crusty. Next, we're gonna swap out these like thin wall, single wall, whatever you wanna call them, tips for these chunky guys right here. Looks 100,000 times better. So much better. These are the same tips that I have on my R32. All right, watch this. Here's the thin one, and here's the thick one. Back to our oil change. Now, I am going to do the thing that if you're changing oil and taking out the drain plug, highly recommend, and that's running a thread chaser into the oil drain plug. This will help not have a sad oil pan after a few oil changes. Also, not sending the drain plug home like a Neanderthal generally helps too. Filter next. This is a place where you usually just get to make a mess of yourself because someone's wobbled out this 6mm Allen drain plug in the filter housing. This one, thankfully, pretty good. Put the drain plug back in. Watch this, I'm gonna try and do a cool transition. We're gonna go down with the old filter and then up with the new one. Now, I am gonna go ahead and put oil in this thing before we get too carried away. The client wanted Molygen, the green stuff. Ooh, yeah, look at how good that looks. So green. It's green because there's dye in it, by the way.
At this point, it feels like we've done a million things to this car, and we still got a handful left to finish. Next up, let's get this horn situation taken care of. There was some discrepancy between the parts catalog and what is actually on the car when it came to the proper connector. Now, after digging around with our man Paul from Shop DAP, we came to the conclusion that probably the best thing to do was just to go ahead and repin the connector for the horn that the client provided. So we're going from the square connector the car had to this rounded one. We also need 2 pins to go into the connector. Luckily, the pins for this connector already have seals on them, so we don't have to worry about adding that. It's basically just cut and splice in this new connector. Then we'll plug it in, mount up the horn, and of course we got to test it to make sure it works.
Horn works. I'm gonna do the brake flush next. Probably one of the more overlooked services on cars, but since we're gonna be doing some spirited driving in the mountains in this thing, we want some fresh brake fluid. I'll try and link this up. This is the brake flush tool from Shop DAP, and y'all, it's a must.
Now, when it comes to flushing the brakes, the sequence in which you do it isn't nearly as important as if we were bleeding the brakes. A brake flush is maintenance, replacing the fluid. Bleeding the brakes usually means that we've introduced air into the system at some point, maybe replacing a caliper or a line or an ABS module. For the bleed procedure, you really do want to follow the manufacturer's recommended sequence. For me, when I do brake flushes, I go right rear, right front, and left front. And I just let the fluid come out until it runs clean.
All right, next we got to put these wheels and tires on, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to torque the wheels down. Then we're going to drop it down on the race ramps and get the suspension torqued.
Now, what the race ramps do is allow us to set the car completely down with the suspension loaded. This puts the car at ride height, which is where most suspension components need to be when you torque them down. If you're not sure whether the car needs to be at ride height or not, always double check the repair manual. In general, it'll tell you where it needs to be. These ramps are a pretty recent addition to the toolbox. So far, I gotta say, I'm digging them. Now, there is one final thing that we need to do to the blue R32, and that's send it over to get an alignment. The client wasn't sure when the last one was performed, and there is actually a camber adjustment on our lower control arms for this car. Before sending it over to my buddies at Apex Tuning, I'm going to break all the tie rods loose. We also have aftermarket adjustable rear links on this R32, so I'm gonna crack those loose as well. For each of the link, we're gonna do a little bit of rust penetrant and then try and break it loose. I had no issue with all 4 adjustments in the back. The right front tie rod and jam nut came loose surprisingly easy.
Oh, geez. That was nice.
The left front, however, was a bit seized.
Oh yeah, there we go. So our jam nut is good and loose. Now, tie rod. Now, I don't know if that's gonna budge. Let's get some heat. We'll get some more spritz. Yeah, here we go. Ready? Look at that. Oh yeah, that's enough. Just a little bit of movement on this tie rod. We'll be good to go.
With the blue R32 happily on its way to get an alignment, let's talk about that red car that I dropped at the beginning of the video. Obviously a 2004 R32 with about 230,000 miles on it. I bought this car from a dude in Texas and had it shipped up to my place. Now, I've shipped cars tons of times, and this is the first time I've ever had an issue. It seems that the guy was backing the car up on the carrier, going a little too fast, and ripped off the front bumper cover. This destroyed the mounting points on both sides, as well as split the bumper basically down the middle. For context, these bumpers are essentially unobtainium, and if you can find one, they're stupid expensive. At this point in time, I've been waiting about a year for the bumper cover for my black R32 that's been in the body shop for what feels like forever, but don't worry, we'll see that car again eventually. This bumper cover is also made of some sort of space-age polymer that requires a different method of repair instead of just plastic welding it. Now, when I tell you that the shipper didn't believe me this was going to be a very expensive bumper to fix, I'm pretty sure they had a temper tantrum when I sent them a $2,500 estimate from the body shop. In fact, at the time of editing this video, I'm still fighting with the insurance of them, so who knows what's gonna happen. I'll show you what I did temporarily in just a little bit. Now, surprisingly for the miles of this car, it's in really good condition, minus the tornado pink paint, which is super common to most red Volkswagens of that vintage. I have a really good friend that goes to this event that needed a set of wheels, so I'm getting this car ready for him. Here's a basic rundown of what I did. Oil change, brake flush, replaced control arm bushings. I did a liquid moly engine flush and added some MOS2. I found that the brake booster hose was split, so we made a repair there. Did a pollen filter. I checked the spark plugs to make sure they were good enough anyway for getting the car to and from Wookies. Now, this car does need some more work. In fact, it sounds like it's supercharged in 4th gear. The whine is so bad, but I gotta say, it's pretty solid for what it is. After doing the common Mark IV stuff, I also dug up an engine cover so that at least it could have an engine cover because, right, it's gotta look cool. Now, because the bumper cover couldn't actually be properly attached and I didn't want to damage it anymore, I stuck this silver GTI bumper cover on it in the meantime while we figure out what's gonna go on with the the red one. I gotta say, it hurt my soul a little bit to do, but the car is ready for Wookies. Well, maybe not ready, but it's going, as is. So we'll see what happens.
Well, Wookies is all said and done, and out of the 4 cars that I had my hands in, the client's Mark IV, my blue Mark IV, this red Mark IV, and my Mark VIII, everybody made it home without breaking, so I call that a super big victory. Client was super happy with their Mark IV and all the work that we did on it. I got to drive the 8 and the 4 back-to-back at Tail of the Dragon. Completely different driving experiences, both awesome in their own right. Unfortunately, I never actually got to drive the red one out there, so I'm a little disappointed myself in that, but with putting on almost 1,000 miles, did really well. We still have a bunch of work to do, and we'll be doing that in the future. Also, these parts right here are in fact transmission and rear diff for the black R32 that I picked up after getting dry ice blasted. Really excited to have those back. I also dropped the bumper cover off to the body shop for that car, so it is actually moving again. Super hyped. All that said, here's the most important takeaway from Wookies this year. The community raised over $50,000 for charity. When I tell y'all I love Wookies and I love the community around it, the money that's raised for charity is like the icing on the cake. What is that, $15,000 more than last year? So huge, huge W. Now, as for the future of this red one, I don't know. I didn't win the Roadtrek Supercharger kit, but I don't know if that's gonna stop us. So maybe that's on deck. Okay, we fixed some cars. They did great at Tail of the Dragon. I don't know what else to say. So with that, I'm out. Have an awesome day, and I'll talk to you again next time. Bye.